"It was just a box of old junk, Dad. You weren't using it." That's what my son said when I asked him what happened to his mother's wedding ring. Junk. He'd sold a box of his mother's things at a yard sale for $40, and somewhere in that box, wrapped in a square of tissue I'd folded with my own shaking hands, was the ring I put on Rose's finger in 1977. The ring she wore for 46 years. The ring I couldn't bring myself to look at after she died, but couldn't ever let go of. He sold it to a stranger for part of $40, and when I told him, he shrugged. What my son didn't know, what he never once bothered to find out, was that there was something hidden inside that ring, something his mother put there in secret that I didn't even know about, that changed everything I thought I understood about the woman I'd loved for half a century. He sold it for $40. He never looked closely enough to see what it really was. A stranger did, and that stranger drove 2 hours to bring it home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Harry Doyle. I'm 71 years old, and I carried the mail in Cedar Bluff for 38 years. The same porches, the same dogs, until my knees gave out. I've been a quiet man my whole life. A mail carrier sees everything on a street and says nothing, and I brought that habit home and kept it for 50 years. It took losing my wife's ring to a yard sale to finally make me speak. Let me tell you about Rose, because Rose is the whole story. I married Rose in the spring of 1977. She worked the lunch counter at the Five and Dime, and she had a laugh you could hear across the store. We didn't have money. The ring I gave her was a thin gold band and a little chip of a diamond I paid off over 8 months, and when I slid it on her finger, I told her I was sorry it wasn't bigger. Rose looked at me and said, "Harry Doyle, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, and I am never taking it off." And she never did. 46 years, through dishwater and garden dirt and the births of our children, that little band never once left her hand. I'll give you one picture of her. Every Friday, for 40 years, Rose made a pot roast, and every Friday she turned the kitchen radio up too loud and danced by herself at the stove, and if I came in, she'd grab me with hands that smelled like onions and make me dance too, right there on the linoleum. That ring was on the hand she held my shoulder with every Friday for 40 years. That's what got sold in a box for $40. We had 2 children. Our daughter, Susan, who lives out in Oregon and calls me every Sunday and turned out kind, and our son, Kevin. This story is about Kevin. Kevin was a restless boy who became a restless man, always a little embarrassed by where he came from, by the small house and the mail carrier father. He got out of Cedar Bluff as fast as he could, married a woman named Deb who looked at our house like she was pricing it. And somewhere along the way, Kevin stopped seeing the people who raised him as people. We became a chore to him, old things to be managed. Rose saw it before I did, but she never said an unkind word about him. That was Rose. There was one good thing that came through Kevin, and her name is Hannah, Kevin's daughter, my granddaughter, 16 now. And Hannah, by some grace, came out pure Rose. Same eyes, same loud laugh.
When she was small, she'd spend summer weeks with us, baking with Rose, dancing to that too loud radio. Hannah loved her grandmother the way her own father had forgotten how to. Rose died 3 years ago. A stroke in the night beside me. 46 years. And then the bed was too big and the house was too quiet. The funeral home gave me back her ring in a small plastic bag, and I could not put it on a shelf, and I could not part with it. So I wrapped it in tissue and put it in Rose's wooden jewelry box, the one that played a song when you opened it, and I put that box up on the closet shelf. For 3 years I didn't open it, because opening it meant hearing that song play in a house where Rose would never hum along again. Knowing the ring was in there, safe, was the one thing that let me sleep. Then Kevin decided I needed managing. It started dressed up as kindness. Kevin began making noises about the house being too much for me. He'd walk through the rooms and say, "Dad, you've got to start letting go of some of this." He meant Rose's things. To Kevin, it was clutter. To me, it was the last furniture of a life. There was one afternoon that should have warned me. Kevin found me reading one of Rose's cookbooks, just reading her handwriting in the margins, her little notes. And he said, not cruel, just empty. "Dad, it's been 3 years. These are just old books." Just old books, with her hand in the margins. I should have understood then that a man who sees his mother's handwriting as clutter would see her wedding ring as junk. About 6 months ago, Kevin announced he was going to help me. He'd run a yard sale, clear out all the old stuff cluttering up the place. I didn't want it, but Kevin had decided, and Deb had decided, and they came up on a Saturday I'd planned to be at the cemetery, and they ran a yard sale on my own lawn while I sat at Rose's grave, and they sold off pieces of my life to strangers for quarters. I came home to a half-empty house. Rose's reading lamp, gone. Pale rectangles on the walls where pictures used to hang, and Kevin proud of himself, counting a little stack of bills. "Made almost $200, Dad. Got rid of a ton of junk." I was too tired and too sad to fight, so I went to bed. I didn't know yet that the worst of it was already gone. It was 3 weeks before I went to find the ring. It was a bad night, and I wanted to hold the one thing of hers I had left, so I reached up to the closet shelf for the wooden jewelry box, the one that played the song. It wasn't there. I searched every shelf, every drawer, the whole house, all night, on my bad knees. I checked the same drawer 6 times, the way you do when the truth is too big to accept. By morning, I knew. I called Kevin and asked him, trying to keep my voice steady, if he'd seen his mother's wooden jewelry box, the one that plays the song. And there was a pause, and then Kevin said, "Oh, yeah, that old thing? I think that was in the stuff we sold. Some lady bought the box of it for $40. Why?" "Kevin," I said, and I could barely get it out, "your mother's wedding ring was in that box."
And he didn't gasp. He didn't apologize. He sighed, the sigh of a man being asked to deal with an inconvenience, and he said, "Dad, come on. How was I supposed to know? It was just a box of old junk. You weren't using it. It was just sitting in a closet. You weren't using it. My son had sold the ring I married his mother with to a stranger for part of $40, and his only feeling about it was annoyance that I'd brought it up. I hung up and I sat at the kitchen table where Rose and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I wept like a child. Not just for the ring, for the understanding that the boy Rose and I raised would hand her whole memory to a stranger for pocket change and feel nothing at all. I thought it was gone forever. A ring sold in a box of junk at a yard sale, scattered into the world, melted down maybe. I grieved it like a second death. For weeks I barely left the house. I'd failed Rose. I'd kept that ring safe for 3 years and then let it slip away. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman got out, maybe 55, kind-faced, holding something small wrapped in a cloth against her chest. She came up my walk and said, "Are you Harry Doyle? Was your wife named Rose?" "Mr. Doyle, my name is Carol Mendez, and I've driven 2 hours to bring you something, and I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." I brought her inside. I made her coffee, because that's what Rose would have done, and Carol Mendez told me her story.
Carol bought and sold estate jewelry, a small booth at an antique mall 2 hours away. She'd stopped at a yard sale in Cedar Bluff and bought a box lot of old jewelry, the wooden box and all, for $40. The wedding ring she'd almost not noticed, tucked in its tissue at the bottom. A thin, old gold band, not worth much. But Carol had a feel for jewelry, and when she cleaned that band to price it, she noticed something most people would have missed: a seam. A hairline seam on the inside of the band that didn't belong. It was a locket, a tiny, secret locket soldered into the inside of the band by some jeweler long ago, so small that in 46 years no one had ever known it was there. Carol worked it open, and inside, folded smaller than a fingernail, was a photograph and a slip of paper. She set them on my kitchen table with hands that shook and slid them toward me. The photograph was Rose, my Rose, 23 years old, in a hospital bed in 1980, holding a newborn baby against her chest, Kevin. It was Rose holding Kevin the day he was born, a photograph the size of my thumbnail that I had never in my life seen, that she'd had made tiny and hidden inside her wedding ring and worn against her own skin for 40 years and never told me about. And the slip of paper, in Rose's small, careful handwriting, said this: "Harry, if you ever find this, I'm probably gone, and you're missing me, and you're holding my ring trying to feel me near. So I hid myself in here, where my heart always was. I'm right here. I was always right here. Yours forever and a little longer, Rose."
I want to tell you I held it together. I didn't. I sat at my own kitchen table and I sobbed, an old man in front of a stranger, and Carol Mendez came around the table and cried right along with me. 2 people who'd never met, weeping over a ring and a photograph and a woman she never knew. Rose had hidden a message for me, for the exact moment I was living in. She'd known someday she'd be gone, and I'd be holding her ring, trying to feel her near, and she'd left herself in there for me to find. And of all the people for that hidden photo to be of, it was Kevin. The baby in my wife's secret heart was the man who sold her wedding ring for $40. When I could speak, I tried to give Carol money, everything in my wallet. She wouldn't take a dime. She said, "Mr. Doyle, when I opened that locket and read that note, I knew it had to come home. I have a husband of 30 years. If I'm ever gone first, I hope to God somebody drives 2 hours to bring him back to me." and she pressed the ring into my hand and closed my fingers around it, and she left. A stranger, 4 hours of her life, to bring my wife home to me, and asked for nothing. My son sold Rose for $40. A stranger gave her back for free. I sat with that for a long time, and the grief turned into something quieter and more certain. Kevin hadn't just been careless. He'd shown me plainly what his mother and I were worth to him, less than $40. And a man who will do that and feel nothing is a man who needs to see himself clearly, just once, in front of the people whose opinion he actually cares about. I didn't want to scream at Kevin. Screaming he could dismiss. I wanted the truth to do what no shouting ever could.
So I waited. Rose's birthday was coming in June, and every year the family still gathers at my house for it, because even Kevin won't skip his dead mother's birthday dinner. Susan flies in from Oregon. The grandkids come, including Hannah, who is 16, and the most like Rose. They'd all be there, and I decided that on Rose's birthday, at Rose's table, the family would learn what had happened to Rose's ring. We were all at the table, the good cloth table out, her empty chair where it always sits. We'd eaten, and I stood up and tapped my glass and said I had something to say about their mother and grandmother on her birthday. Kevin barely looked up from his phone. I told them the whole story, quietly, how I'd kept Rose's ring safe in her music box for 3 years because it was the one thing that let me sleep. I watched Kevin's head come up slowly, watched the color leave his face as he understood where this was going, in front of his wife, his sister, his own daughter. I told them how the ring had been sold. I didn't say Kevin's name. I didn't have to. Deb tried to get out in front of it, something about only trying to help declutter. And I said, quietly, "Deb, I told Kevin the ring was in that box. And do you know what he said to me? He said it was just junk. He said I wasn't using it." And Deb stopped talking. And then I told them about Carol, the stranger, the 2-hour drive, and I took out the ring and I opened the little locket that none of us had ever known was there, and I passed around that thumbnail photograph of Rose, 23, holding her newborn son, and I read them Rose's note. I hid myself in here, where my heart always was. I'm right here. I was always right here. The table was dead silent. Susan was crying. Hannah was crying so hard she had to leave the room and come back. And Kevin sat there holding a photograph of his own mother cradling him as a baby, a photograph he had sold to a stranger for part of $40 and called junk. And there was nowhere for him to look and nothing to say, because everyone at that table now understood what he had done and who he was. He didn't get to dismiss it. He didn't get to sigh. He just had to sit in it. He muttered that he was sorry, but sorry has a sound when it's real, and a different sound when it's just a man wanting a terrible moment to be over, and everyone at that table could hear which one this was, especially Hannah, who looked at her father that night the way you look at someone when a thing you suspected about them turns out to be true. I did not throw my son out. He's still Rose's boy, and Rose would not have wanted that. But something at that table shifted that night and never shifted back. Kevin is, in his family's eyes, a smaller man than he was at the start of that dinner, and he knows it, and he will know it for the rest of his life. His own daughter looks at him differently now. He didn't lose a lawsuit. He lost the benefit of the doubt. From everyone's opinion he'd spent his life chasing. That was the only justice I wanted. And then I did the one thing I'd been planning all along. I turned to Hannah, 16 years old, my granddaughter, with Rose's eyes and Rose's loud laugh, the one who'd cried hardest. And I told her that someday, not yet, but someday, her grandmother's ring would be hers. The secret locket, the photo, the note, all of it. Because the ring should go to the person who understands what it is, and it was never going to be the man who already proved he thought it was junk. Hannah came around the table and hugged me so hard I felt it in my bad knees, and I swear I felt Rose in the room laughing that loud laugh, glad. That was 4 months ago. The ring is on a chain around my neck now, where I can feel it, until the day it's Hannah's. Carol Mendez and I still talk. She's become a friend, the strangest and kindest gift to come out of all this. Kevin and I speak, a little, carefully. The damage is the damage. People ask me sometimes if I forgive him. I don't know how to answer that. What I know is this. My son held his mother's whole heart in his hands and saw a box of junk worth $40. He never once looked closely enough to find what was hidden inside, because he never looked closely at her at all. A stranger looked closer at my wife's ring in one afternoon than my own son looked at his mother in 20 years. That's the whole thing in the end. Some people will hold your entire life in their hands and see junk, and some stranger will hold it for one moment and see treasure. Rose hid her heart in that ring so I'd never lose her. Kevin sold it for $40. It was worth everything. He just never looked.